Searching for a camera is difficult, especially being a beginner. There's so many choices out there, you don't know which one is the right choice for you. I was on that exact same boat last year when I was looking for a camera to replace my iPhone that I was using so that I can continue to make YouTube videos. When I found the Canon M50, I realized that this is a camera that's simple but yet already boasts way better quality than what my iPhone used to give me. Now you're probably in the part of choosing a camera where you're searching through the tech websites and you're being overwhelmed by all the choices you have. There's camera bodies, there's lenses, there's quality of the video, 8K, 4K, 1080p, slow motion, all the frames per second, and then you get to the point of the quality of the video, which is Canon S-Log or Canon C-Log, S-Log, HDR. There's so many things that you need to take into consideration. And honestly, this Canon M50 I think is best for someone that's a beginner. And that brings me to the point of the good news, or bad news really, however you want to see it, is that the M50 is actually very simple, yet it gives you great quality for your videos. And by that I mean that this camera does only shoot 1080p. Well, really it does shoot 4K, but we'll get to that later on why you shouldn't be using that. But let's say the max it can do is 1080p. But honestly, 1080 is really good, especially because most of the viewers on YouTube are watching from their mobile device and aren't really watching in a big screen TV, which means that their phones will most likely be playing at 480 or 720, and you don't really need that 4K quality for most of your viewers. And as an example, I'm actually shooting on the Canon M50 right now in 1080p, 24 frames per second, and you can be the judge of how good the quality is on this camera and how good the mic is, which I'll get to later on which one I'm recording. But before I tell you about all the gear that I have attached to the camera to make the picture look like this, I'm going to show you or walk you through all the options and settings that I set so that you can get this exact quality from your Canon M50 as well. So what you want to do first is you're going to go ahead and change that dial at the top of the camera to video, which is a little icon that looks like a camcorder. Now when prompted, you will choose manual exposure mode, which is what's going to give you the most control over all of the options in this camera. Now the first setting you want to adjust is the f-stop setting, which will be at the bottom of the screen. So this will be set to the lowest it will go for your camera. This is what will allow more light to hit the sensor, which is great for when you have poor lighting, and it will also create a separation between you and that background by giving you that blurry effect or that bokeh or depth of field so that everything in the background is blurry where you're still in focus. Now the shutter speed will usually be set to twice the amount of the frame rate, which because I am shooting 24 FPS, I'm going to set mine at 1/60. Now if you are shooting in 60 FPS, you want to set it to 1/120 or whatever number is closest to that. Some cameras go to 1/125 and some you'll have to set it a little bit higher than that. Remember that the shutter speed is just kind of a ballpark of where you should have it. If you are filming in a place that has lights that flicker, or if you're recording a device screen, you might have to adjust that up or down to kind of not have that flicker in your video footage. Now the last thing we're going to be adjusting is the ISO, which just like the f-stop, you will set it to as low as you can, but you want to keep the exposure right. Now the screen has this exposure meter in the middle that will tell you if your clip is under or overexposed. Ideally you want to set it in the center or just barely over or under. If the meter is gone, half press the shutter button and it will come right back so that you can go ahead and set the ISO so that your exposure is correct. Now let's go ahead and talk about the lens I am using. I'm currently using the EFM 22mm f2 lens, which is a couple $100, and it's native to this camera, so there is going to be no need for an adapter and it will just snap right on. Now when buying all of this gear, the lenses and the microphone and anything extra, I do recommend that you go with used or renewed items, either from Amazon or Best Buy or wherever you're buying it from, only because this is beginner tech and you will start using it, but as you get more into video making and you enjoy it more, I can almost guarantee you're going to want to upgrade, and just for later resale value, you're going to have better luck by buying it used to begin with. Now this 22mm lens is honestly very great for photo and for video as well. It has a low f-stop, which means you will allow more light into the sensor, and it will also create that blurry background. As you guys can see here, everything in the background, you can't really see my backpack in there. It becomes kind of like a black circle, and that's because the f-stop is set to 2, so it allows me to be in focus, but everything else in the background to be a little blurred out. Now the Canon M50 is a crop sensor camera, which means it's not full frame and it won't give you that full frame sensor. So every single image you're seeing is actually cropped from what a full frame camera would give you. So because this lens is a 22mm, but we're attaching it to a crop sensor, this camera is more like a 35mm lens. Now, like I said, this was my beginner setup and I really liked it a lot. I even liked this so much that because I was using a 22mm lens, when I switched over to the Canon R6, I actually went out and I bought a 35mm lens. Now, if you bought the Canon M50 with the kit lens, you will be getting a 15 to 45mm lens. Let me see if I can get that in focus. Now, this lens is great, except the f-stop is kind of high. It's a variable aperture, so it starts at 3.5 and I believe it goes up to a 6.5. The only problem with that is that at a lower or higher f-stop, you will be letting less light into the sensor. There won't be much of a blurry background, and if you have poor lighting, you won't really look that great and you will have grainy footage. Now, if you live in an apartment or a house that has great lighting and you have a lot of window light, you might just need the kit lens, but for me, I live in an apartment and it's not set up so that I don't get much light throughout the day. So I had to buy this lens, which honestly is great. And I have a couple lights set up. And as you can tell, or at least I hope you can tell as well, I really like the way the quality of the footage looks and the way it gives me that bokeh effect where it keeps me in focus, but the rest of the background is blurry. Now for the microphone, you actually have a couple of options. If you have looked around and you saw the Canon M50, there is a creator kit, which now it has been updated because the M50 that I have is no longer in sale. So now they're selling the M50 Mark II. So it comes with a different microphone, but originally the one I bought, I did buy the creator kit and it came with a Rode Mic Go. This is actually a microphone I use for the majority of the time when I first started making videos. This is honestly still the mic I'm using now, so you can tell how good the quality of this microphone is. It did start giving me problems, so if I'm not using this microphone, I will put in a correction here, because if it starts flickering again or making that noise I used to get, then I'm definitely not going to be using that mic audio. I do have a backup here, which is going to be actually the second thing I recommend, is a podcast mic. This is the Fine K6A3A. This costs about $50. It's a podcast microphone and it attaches with a clamp to the desk. Unfortunately, it doesn't come with that clamp. I did buy that separately. It ran me about another $15 to get this clamp little arm thing so that I can adjust it and set it to wherever I want. But I do suggest you get more of a podcast microphone, especially if you're recording a podcast or you're a streamer and you're looking at this camera to stream. It might be better to get a microphone like this because it gets closer to the subject when you're recording, as well as being able to be adjusted to wherever you want it in case you look another way or you're talking to someone else. And for the third option, which is going to be the cheapest option, is actually getting a lavalier microphone. These microphones are kind of what you see when people are interviewing. They're microphones that go under the shirt and attach to your shirt, either within inside or on the outside, depending how you want to wear it. And this is as close to the subject as it can get. And it allows you also to be as far away from the camera as you want to be and move around wherever you want and still get great audio. Now, I mentioned 3 different microphones, and it really depends on how you're going to be using the microphone or the camera itself. If you're going to be vlogging and you need a microphone that's on the camera, it's better to go with that microphone that's called a shotgun mic that just goes on the camera itself. That way, whenever you're looking at the camera, it sounds accurate and it's going to be close enough if you're holding it at an arm's distance that it's going to be good quality. If you are going to be doing most of your video shoots next to a desk or a table, or you're going to be interviewing someone kind of like podcast style or streaming, I do recommend you go with a podcast microphone like the one I have here, just because it's going to allow you to also get closer to the subject And like I mentioned, you can turn around and talk and move it wherever you're going to need it. And lastly, if you are going to be doing a lot of videos where you're far away from the camera outside, doing interviews or just asking people on the street, it's better to use a lavalier microphone just because it's easier. I've even seen some people just use the microphone on their phones and then they go ahead and sync that up later once they get to a computer. That also works. It really depends on your usage and how you're looking to get it. These are all great options. Remember, it's whatever you're going to use it for. Now, when it comes to the record settings of this camera, it really depends on what you're going to be recording. If you want slow motion, I do recommend that you go with 60 FPS. I'm currently using 1080p at 24 frames per second. This is best for all of the work I do, and it really works for anything that's not going to be fast motion or something that you're not thinking of slowing down later in post-production. Now, like I mentioned earlier, remember, if you're uploading this to YouTube, a lot of the people that watch YouTube will be watching from their mobile devices. So there's really no point in trying to go 4K or being super slow motion, because most of the time people are going to be watching on a small screen and won't really be noticing that much of a difference with anything that's higher than 720p. I also mentioned that this camera does record in 4K, but it has a little caveat. There's actually two different caveats. The first one's being the focus mode once it's in 4K isn't that great. So as you guys can tell with this one, I'll even show you, I can move around and it's face tracking. So no matter where I move in the frame, it records me just fine. In 4K, it won't do that. It will go ahead and it will lose that function of dual pixel autofocus. So it won't be able to keep up wherever you're moving. So if you're using the camera to record fast movements or you're constantly moving around, even just talking like this, if you just move a little bit, it won't track you and it'll lose focus. So here's a quick video on how 4K looks on this one. Like I mentioned, the autofocus just keeps going in and out. And if I move, it's going to miss me a couple of times. Not only that, but I'm sure you guys have realized it went ahead and cropped in. So in 4K, it will crop in even further than it already does, being a crop sensor camera. So it's really up to you. You can just move further away from the camera or move the camera further away from you. If you have the space, this could work. You can also set it to manual focus so that it doesn't do tracking or any of that, and it might work better for you. Remember that being a beginner is always at the beginning of your career or at the beginning of your journey. And the only thing you can do is get better at learning more about cameras, and then you'll be upgrading your kit, and sooner than later, you'll be the one making a video explaining to someone else how to use that camera. Thank you guys for watching this video and sticking around until the end. Let me know down in the comments what settings you're going to try out with the Canon M50 first, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.